Welcome to the spring warrant review for town meeting. I am Martha Hanner from the Amherst League of Women Voters. The League has organized tonight's meeting together with the Town Meeting Coordinating Committee in order to give all town meeting members an overview of the various articles that will be discussed and voted upon when town meeting convenes on April 30th. Tonight's presenters will briefly describe each warrant article, but they're not going to give the pros and cons. That discussion properly occurs during town meeting. If all the speakers keep to their times, there will be time for questions as we go along. The League works to help inform voters at all levels of government, including local government. Here in Amherst, we sponsor candidates forums as well as forums on important local issues. We prepare the election guide that comes out in the newspaper before local elections, and they represent you, which includes the names of all town meeting members as well as other local officials. And to support our work, we have an annual book sale. So the book sale will take place again in midsummer at Fort River School Gymnasium the last weekend in July and the first weekend in August. And book collection at the Fort River School Gymnasium will begin on June 30th. For more information about that, please see our website as it gets closer to the time. But remember, you don't want to get sand in your Kindle. You can just get all your summer reading from us. We have thousands of books at very low prices. Yes. Right. So we thank Amherst Media for recording tonight's presentations, and they will rebroadcast this program several times so that all town meeting members hopefully will have a chance to view it. So hello to those of you who are going to be watching from home, and to our members here in this room, please just check that your cell phone bells have been turned off. Yes, all right. And now I would like to introduce Peggy Roberts, Chair of the Town Meeting Coordinating Committee, who will be moderating tonight's meeting.
Actually, it was the League of Women Voters that did warrant reviews for many years, and then in 1905 we joined the job of doing warrant reviews to let people know what was coming up on town meeting. And tonight we're going to introduce warrant articles coming to town meeting, which is going to start on the 30th. We hope that we help you understand what each of the articles is about. And we have presenters allotted a certain amount of time because we have 41 articles to do. So we have a timed agenda, and all of the presenters have been given a certain amount of time, and if you have a little time at the end of your time, people can ask questions at the end of the meeting. We usually have a little bit of time for questions also. So we can start now. Article 1, I will start because it simply asks if town meeting will hear reports which are not available in written form from town officials, boards, or committees. So people always vote yes on that. So our first presenter will be Mary Lou Thielman for the Finance Committee.
Article 2, which is unpaid bills, it's an annual article, and we pay these unpaid bills from previous years. Sometimes, they show up during this year, but they were from last year, the year before. So at this point in time, the town is not aware of any unpaid bills, but if there are any, they will be presented at town meeting. Article 4, our budget, it's the budget amendments. And again, this is an annual item. How the town budget is constructed is that each department has a budget. And sometimes budgets run over in departments, but the manager cannot move money from one department to the other. So about this time of year, the departments look at their budgets and say, we're running over. For instance, snow and ice is an issue some years, and there are other departments in other years. So at that point, if there are some departments with some excess money, it's presented to town meeting to move it from one department to another. And again, at this time, we don't have any figures for you, but we will at town meeting. The retirement assessment is pretty straightforward. It's the town share of the employee's retirement fund. Item 6 is another annual article, and this is because we use Northampton for our regional lockup when we have people who need to be locked up, and we pay a fee every year for those services. Article 7, all of you have heard OPEB, other post-employment benefits, and our liability is huge, but every year the town has been contributing money to bring that down. And this year, we're adding $500,000 toward our obligation to pay this benefit. Article 9 is a reserve fund. That is one that the town keeps aside to take care of any emergencies. This year, I think it's a boiler went at North Station. So rather than coming back and having a special town meeting to get money to pay for that, we go into this fund. So it's $100,000. We do it annually. At the end of the year, if there's money left over, it goes into free cash, and we start again in the new year with $100,000. The revolving fund reauthorization, this is for the after-school program in the elementary schools. We were advised to have a bylaw that would handle this fund. So the fund is at $400,000. The receipts come into that fund for tuition and fees and gifts and grants. And so that'll be credited to the fund, and any expenses will be taken out of that fund, and it can never exceed $400,000. Article 15, it's the transportation. These funds are going to be used to repair the Main Street parking lot, which is right across the street from Town Hall, and it's part of the rehabilitation of the North Common, which also is across from Town Hall. I think we have seen, town meeting has seen some of the diagrams in the past as to how they want to improve the North Common here in town. Article 17 is $1 million, and that's to go back to Article 16. The Capital Bond Water Fund, that's $2 million, and that will be used to pay the costs of the water main and system replacement on Northampton Road. I believe it's in 2019 that the Mass Highway Department is going to improve that road, and at that time we want to replace the water main and the system there in Northampton Road. So the project is all being done at the same time. So we're not doing one project one year, then digging the place up 2 years later. So that's why we're asking for that money now. The sewer fund is Article 17. That's $1 million, and that's to pay for the cost of replacing a 20-year-old gravity belt thickener. That belt is used to take fluids out of solid waste and compact it. The old belt will be used as a backup. The Capital Bond 18 for PEG, the town agreed to borrow funds to be used by Amherst Media to upgrade audiovisual equipment promptly. The cost of borrowing will be met through funds provided by a contract with Comcast, which will be over the next 10 years. And free cash, that's the Article 25. That's done after all of the budget articles are taken care of. And that allows us to adjust that at that time, because as you know, in the past, town meeting has added money to the budget for subsidies for children to do the pool, and that adds to the budget. So free cash then, at that point in time, we would take money out of free cash and put it toward those items so that the budget is balanced. To do that with free cash is a simple majority, or actually if someone decide, yes, if you decide to take it out. If you cut something from the budget, that additional money will go into free cash. Free cash requires only a simple majority of town meeting. The next item, 26, is used in the same way. It's a stabilization fund, but that requires a 2/3 vote to take money out. So that's it for the Finance Committee. Do you want me to entertain any questions now?
Questions? Any questions in the audience? No questions with
Great.
money?
That's good. Thank you.
Okay, now we have Sean Mangano, who is the School Finance Director, doing a very nice job. And tell
Hello.
us about Article 10.
Yes, so I have Article 10. This is the assessment method for the regional school district. This is how the regional schools determine how much each member town will pay of the regional budget each year. So regional school committees have to decide among two options each year to assess member towns. The first option they can consider is something called the statutory method. This method uses a formula created by the state that factors in income, property values, enrollment, and other data specific to a member town. It allocates the majority of the assessment, but there's always some amount left over of the assessment that needs to be allocated to member towns, and that's allocated based on the regional agreement. So way back in the 60s, we signed a regional agreement that had an assessment method in it, and so any excess under this method is allocated by the regional agreement. The other option that regional school committees have is the alternative method. So the alternative method allocates the entire assessment according to the regional agreement. So the first option was just a portion. The second option, it's the entire assessment. For us, the regional agreement right now, the assessment method is a 5-year rolling average of enrollment with a very small amount that's allocated based on EQV, which is essentially property values. So those are the two options. So the regional school committee for FY19 voted to use the alternative method, but they have also voted an amendment to the regional agreement for FY19. So the district has used the alternative method every year since 2004, but there were several years that we did have amendments that went along with that as well. FY05 to FY07, FY16 to FY18, and also what's proposed for FY19. After months of meetings and analysis over this past summer, the regional school committee and many town officials agreed to basically do a 5-year transition plan to the statutory method, which was option 1 on that first screen. But since it's a transition and it's over 5 years, it's technically an alternative method, and it's different than what's in our regional agreement, so it requires an amendment. Further discussion is still needed beyond year 1, so there was agreement among many officials to do this for the first year, but there's still some people that want to talk about, are we going to go forward with the transition for the year after that? And since it's an amendment, it will be, this article and every year has to have approval at all 4 spring town meetings in each member town, so Leverett, Pelham, Shutesbury, and Amherst. So what does the assessment method look like? For FY19, essentially the assessment will be based on 20% of the statutory method, and the remainder will be allocated based on the regional agreement, which is the 5-year rolling average of enrollment with the small amount based on property values. Unless there's an agreement to do something else beyond FY19, then we would phase in 20% more the following year until it's fully phased in about 4 or 5 years. And why is this an important topic? The assessment method determines how much each town pays, and the changes in the assessment method, as we've seen in past years, can either positively or negatively impact the regional school budget. That's it. Any questions?
Questions? No questions?
I see a question.
Wait for the microphone.
What's your name first, please?
Sure, Alex Lefebvre, Precinct 10. I just had a question about the thought process behind moving back to the statutory.
Yeah, there were a lot of meetings this summer. We brought in some outside help, objective help to sort of negotiate, bring new ideas into the fold. We researched a lot of different assessment methods this summer. For those who are sort of new to this topic, there's disagreement among town officials over what's the best way to share the cost of the regional school district, and the statutory is sort of the default method. So if you can't agree to something else, at some point you're probably going to end up back on the statutory method. And I'll say we've done this for 3 or 4 years and we haven't agreed long term to anything else. So I don't want to say that we never will, because every year it seems like something new pops up. But we did also want to sort of set a trajectory for the district that if we don't agree to something else, we're on a path towards something that's a little more permanent.
Mary Streeter, Precinct 8. Do you know yet whether or not the method that you're choosing will advantage Amherst or not? It might be early, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's different every year. So we typically listen to the Finance Committee guidance like we have this year. So in terms of the assessment method for Amherst and whether it goes up or down, we've adhered to the guidance for Amherst this year, which is the 3.5% increase. There's been some years in the past where if you didn't look at the Finance Committee guidance and you just said, does the assessment method go up or down? I think recently the statutory method has made the Amherst assessment go up, but in prior years it's made it go down. So it really depends on your enrollment, how much new growth is going on, income levels. So it changes over time. Yeah.
Morianne Adams, Precinct 10. I'm wondering about the part that depends on the property values.
Yeah.
Because property values, I understand, are somewhat higher in Amherst than in the other participating. Sure. But that really wouldn't affect the cost per student. So I'm wondering what the thinking is in factoring property values into that.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you what I think the state thinks in terms of factoring that in, is that the revenue source that towns have to pay the assessment is driven by property values. So higher property values would theoretically lead to more revenue that the town has to pay the assessment. There's not that big of a difference among our member towns and property values. I think the bigger thing for Amherst is there's more new growth that happens in Amherst than the other towns, which is a good thing and a bad thing. But I think in general that's what the thinking is behind property values being factored in, is that contributes to the tax pool, and that's what you pay the assessments out of. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next we have Nate. Where is Nate? There he is. Okay, Nate Buddington, who's chair of the Community Preservation Act Committee, CPAC.
Thank you. Excuse me. We have a number of proposals here, so I'm going to go through these somewhat quickly, and then take time for questions. I'm going to start with open space, which includes recreation. Recreation is folded into the open space proposals. There's a $50,000 proposal. 12, I'm sorry, Article 12. There's a $50,000 project to refurbish completely the basketball courts at Mill River. $50,000 was allocated last year. It became clear pretty early on that was really underestimated how much it was going to cost. It's going to be significantly more, close to $100,000. This is a complete restoration, everything, of those very, very heavily used basketball courts.
Wait, if you have a question, wait.
It's folded in.
Microphone.
It's folded into open space.
You said open space, and I noticed that it's listed under recreation. That's what I'm asking.
Yep. Recreation is folded into the open space allocation. So. The Mill River baseball fields, this is a $44,500 project. In 2015, Amherst Baseball was awarded about $126,000 for the restoration of both baseball fields. That, again, turned out to be a flawed estimate of how much it was going to be to replace both fields. So one field was completely restored. Another field was partially restored, and this is to complete the project, which means irrigation, shade structures, and just batting cages for both fields. The Amherst Dog Park Task Force has come to us with a $90,000 proposal. We're splitting that up between recreation and, I guess, is it historic preservation? They had originally come to us with a $200,000 proposal that included purchasing land, but we were able to negotiate that down to a smaller request, which allows us to use part of the landfill off of Old Belchertown Road. And part of the expense of this is not only the construction of the dog park, but we have to fund a reuse study, a Department of Environmental Protection reuse study. We have to do surveys. There's a very big match from the Stanton Foundation, I think 200,000 plus for this project. So this was a really nice proposal because the match was so big. The Epstein property acquisition, this is about a 30-acre piece of land that has one of the biggest ponds in Amherst. It is a developable piece of property, so this is really an opportunity to save this property. It's on really the southeast corner of the intersection where the double rotary is by Atkins. You can't really see the property from the road. It's down, but it's 30 acres, allows us to have unfettered access up to the Holyoke Range in addition to saving a sizable pond. This is a $113,000 proposal, and there's about a $150,000 state grant that's matching that. There's also a smaller $25,000 due diligence proposal. This is something that comes up every couple of years. We award money for due diligence. It gets spent down for things like surveys and appraisals and different studies that the town is often required to do with land management and purchases. And that fund is dwindling down, so we're beefing it up again with a $25,000 gift. Let's move to historic preservation. The Amherst Historical Society has been asking for a new boiler in the Stronghouse. It's kind of an interesting situation there now. There's 2 heating systems, and they really, they're well past overdue a replacement. This is a $30,000 request to completely switch out the old inefficient heating system with a new one. This will be an oil system. Last year, CPAC awarded a grant to the Historical Society for an evaluation, kind of an inventory of their pretty remarkable textile collection. And these textiles, as they went through the process, it became clear that there was more to be studied with these, and so it's about identifying dates and how to store them and how to conserve them, what's in the inventory. So there's a $13,580 proposal to continue the evaluation of the textile collection. The North Amherst Community Farm has asked for $130,000. This is to be a part of a pretty significant restoration of the Dickinson farmhouse, which is right there by Simple Gifts Farm. This money will be dedicated to the reconstruction of the exterior of the house. There are other funding mechanisms that are taking care of the interior of the house. This is an 1833 house that will, when it's finished, will provide housing for, there'll be 2 units for farm workers at the farm there. A couple of community housing projects to talk about. We have a $112,815 grant for Amherst Community Connections, and this is for 3 housing vouchers for chronically homeless in Amherst. They have a very, very similar program. They've been operating for a couple of years. It's been pretty successful. This is both for housing chronically homeless who really need extra help. They can be people with disabilities, cognitive disabilities, physical disabilities, and this is both to get their housing stabilized and also some support in terms of life skills and potentially employment. This would be 3 housing vouchers that would last for 3 years. The Amherst Community Land Trust has a program that we're awarding $266,200 to. This is for a first-time homebuyer assistance program. The ACLT is going to identify 2 properties that will be close to transportation, hopefully close to town centers, where they will retain ownership of the land, and the houses on the property will be used for first-time homebuyers, for low-income homebuyers. So this really gives us an opportunity to have 2 really affordable properties for home purchase for first-time buyers in prime locations for transportation. We have a smaller but a pretty important grant to the Amherst Municipal Affordable Housing Trust. This is $40,000. This is to support a consultant that has been on board for a while, someone with some pretty remarkable experience in affordable housing. And as we ramp up some housing proposals in the near future, this is someone who's really going to be an important figure in the development of those housing plans. And then we have $150,000 grant to the Affordable Housing Trust. This is to have this money in reserve so that this organization can be nimble enough to, at the time that a property may arise that would be potentially a really good project for affordable housing, they will have the flexibility to go after that property quickly. And then we have the least, I believe this is probably the least glamorous of all of our proposals. This is our administrative expenses, which we do every year. These are funds that are used to pay membership dues in the Community Preservation Coalition, public meeting notices and things of that nature. It's a $3,500 expense that will be coming out of this budget. I think that's everything. Any questions?
I wonder if you could clarify a little bit. The Epstein property purchase, you said we have a state grant, and is the $113,000 amount coming from the town?
This would be a CPA grant, right, that would match the state grant.
Okay, so the total cost of the project will be Do you know?
200 and... Yeah, just 270,000 total.
Mary Streeter is my name. I'm from Precinct 8. I was just curious, a couple of years ago, the plan to have the solar array on the old landfill was done away with, I think, because there was a endangered sparrow or some other animal there, and I was just curious, wouldn't dogs running all around there endanger them more? Has that been discussed?
This is a corner of the landfill. It's a small piece of property. I think it may be an acre. It will be fenced, so the dogs are contained.
Okay.
Yeah, and to get to the issue of the cap, the posts for the fence are sitting on top. We're not digging holes for the fence posts. It's a technology where they just rest on the ground.
I was curious, I see that that dog area is twice here. Is it that it's,
We sometimes split up how we account for the money.
so is it a total of
It's a
both then?
Yeah, it's a total of 90,000. That's the request. That's what we voted on. 90,000.
John Hornick. With respect to the Epstein property acquisition, I was curious about whether any of that borders on a roadway. So I know the city of Northampton, when it acquires a big piece of conservation property, may carve out a little parcel that is on a road for affordable housing. And so I was wondering if that's a possibility at all here. Was that considered?
That was not a part of the proposal. Do you want to? Yeah.
Dave Zomack, Assistant Town Manager. I know we're short on time. To the question, yes, it was considered. It's a very complicated frontage situation. There is frontage on this property on the double roundabout. Some of the rest of the frontage is somewhat compromised by wetlands and a stream, but there is a small amount of developable land there in the form of a flag lot. So in our big picture of things, we did not consider that the best place for affordable housing because it's a flag lot. So I hope that answers the question. We are looking at some other parcels that have much more frontage where we could combine a conservation purchase with affordable housing on the frontage. But this developable land is backland, if you will, of the flag lot.
Rob Olmsted. I'm curious, as a first-time town meeting member, is this a sort of all or nothing proposal when you look at an article like this?
Meaning?
Meaning the sense of, do we approve all of these as proposed? Is that how it works?
Well, I think they're proposed as a slate. I think you can propose to remove one and vote on it separately, if I'm not mistaken, if that's the process in town meeting, which just requires another vote.
Sure. Thank you.
Anything else? Thank you.
Okay. Connie Kruger, is Select Board Member and Chair of the Joint Capital Planning Committee, JCPC. Talking about Articles 13 and 14.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you to the League for sponsoring this wonderful event again, and thank you all for coming out. So I'm going to talk to you about the Joint Capital Planning Committee process and some of the work we did. But I want to start by, I guess, apologizing because I don't think you yet have the Joint Capital Planning report that was in the mailing that I think you didn't get yet. And so given that, you're kind of flying blind on this one, and I'm going to try to do it with words, but really when you're talking about numbers, you know, we'll do the best we can, but and I'm going to try to, even if you, okay, so you have, so let's making people dizzy, let's wait, so thank you, I didn't know if you had it in there, even though you don't have it in front of you. So there's a mixture of some old hands here who know this stuff and some newer people, so I want to explain that the Joint Capital Planning Committee is the way that we coordinate the different capital needs of the departments, which also include the schools and the library. And so there's two members from the Finance Committee. Mary Lou Tileman, who was here earlier that you heard from Finance Committee, has left. She was one of the members. And Alex Lefebvre is in the back, was also a guilty party in this, representing the libraries. And I was representing Select Board, and then we also had Andy Steinberg, Tamsin Eli from the library, and Eric Nakajima for the schools, and help me out now, and Phoebe Hazard and Bernie Kubiak was another Finance Committee. So it's a really productive group. It's my third year, and this was my first year as chair. And what you'll see in Article 13 and 14, and I'm really going to speak to them together. One is equipment, we do that, and the other one is buildings, and we've combined facilities. We actually, in our work, look at buildings and facilities separately, but you've got but what you don't have are the money amounts. So the Joint Capital Planning Committee is recommending a capital project funding for FY 2019, in other words, the year that starts July 1st, for a total of $8,026,817. And Ellen, that would be like the front page. I'm summarizing some of that narrative, and then we'll get into the description. That number includes $1,136,925,000 for equipment, so that would be Article 13, and then $1,458,500 for buildings, and another $5,431,392 for facilities. Also included in this is the Community Preservation Act project spending that you just heard about of $1,065,145. So what it talks about in the report at the beginning refers you to sort of the color coding, and what you don't have, but I think Mr. Powell can show you, is the spreadsheet that goes along with the narrative. So it's really hard to talk about dollars the way I just did with really big figures without referring back, and you can actually find the different categories of expense and sources of income in this. Do you have, at the back, do you have it? Yeah. So I wanted to cover a couple of highlights, and I wanted to be brief because we have a lot to cover tonight. But one of the issues for this year was wanting to shift some, okay, so I've put the two together, okay. So we wanted to shift more money to roads and sidewalks, and so the manager worked with us and suggested we put off some of our rolling stock or our truck and equipment purchases to subsequent years so that we could put more in. Because we had a consultant report of $12 million needed for road work. And we had Chapter 90, that's the state money coming in for roads, at $841,883, which is barely a dent. So we came up with another $968,364 in town allocation to match, to go with that, to try to get up to at least as close to $2 million as we could. And then another $100,000 for sidewalk, which is up from last year. And really quickly, We tried something new this year. We opened up the joint capital planning process to citizens. We had 3 citizen applications with their ideas. They happened to all be road and sidewalk projects, and so we worked with them. Some were underway, some we sent back to the Transportation Advisory Committee. We think it was productive and we learned a lot, so we're going to improve it. I have 30 seconds left. I'm not sure I have a whole lot to add, except to say, when you do get your report, there's the narrative, and then what we didn't get to is there's a couple of pages of descriptive items that look like this, so it breaks it down. I was going to highlight some of the more expensive ones, but I think you'll be quite able to read what they're for, hopefully somewhat self-explanatory. But that's all the time I have for joint capital planning, and those are big dollars. Oh, one last thing, if I might. Each year, we try to get to our goal of 10% of the tax levy for capital. Last year, we were at 8.5%. We've now gone with 9% for capital. We're not quite at 10%. And we find really hard years, the town has cut back on that, and then we have deferred maintenance, and we're playing catch-up. We're still playing catch-up, but our recommendation is using that 9% figure. Okay.
I remember before there was the JCBC, and it was a whole different world of fighting.
When we try to work together ahead of time and
Yeah, it works much better this way. Questions? There's a question over here.
hand for questions? I didn't see anything. Nope.
Chris, didn't? Oh, I thought so.
The numbers were too big. If I'd started at 25,000, I'm sure we would have had quite a few.
Okay.
It's too overwhelming. These are really big figures out of our budget, so, okay. I don't see
Okay,
anyone.
no more questions? So, we have our chair of the select board who is going to talk to us about select board money.
Good evening. So I have several of the articles within town meeting to talk to you about tonight. Hopefully I'll be able to lay them out fairly clearly. There are a number of different ones to go over. Most of these will be either sponsored by the select board or sponsored by the select board in concert with others. We'll start with Article 3, which is acceptance of optional tax exemptions. This is something we do each and every year. The state has a number of allowable tax exemptions for certain qualifying individuals. There are, within state law, allowable additional exemptions you can provide to your community, and we have, in my memory of being in town meeting, we've always done this. This allows for additional property tax exemptions for the certain eligible elderly, blind, and veterans members of our community. Ballpark estimate of what it costs the town in deferred revenue is about $35,000 or so. That's not a precise number, but that's kind of the neighborhood that it's been over the years. So that's Article 3. Next up is Article 19 and Article 20 kind of go hand in hand. They both involve the coal property. The coal property, I believe, is in South Amherst. We had a particular plan of action relative to that property, and so by virtue of the ongoing work of both staff and the property owners, that project has changed in some respects. So we had an authorization to borrow money to buy land, and we don't need to do that. And so what Article 19 does is rescinds that authorization to borrow money. Article 20 is the acquisition of an easement, which is basically permission to use the property for certain reasons. And so what we're getting instead of a piece of property that we own, we get the opportunity to walk across it and get to our open space and recreational opportunities that are near this piece of property. So I think it works out better for the current landowner and for the town as well. And so what Article 19 does, again, is to rescind the authorization that that town meeting granted to borrow money, and then Article 20 allows us to acquire an easement from the property owner, which, if memory serves, they aren't going to charge us for. I don't think we have any easements that we're being charged for. We're not seeking that. So it's a nice coordination with them. Article 22, acquisition of easements, multiple locations. So it's a series, this is a pretty lengthy article, but when we were putting the warrant together, we thought it better to put these all together as opposed to having 6 or 7 different articles that really effectively do the same sort of thing, which is there are a number of projects. The first part is the East Hadley Road Sidewalk project. The second one is on West Bay Road. The third one is on East Pleasant Street. The fourth one is on Belchertown Road. And all of these, and the fifth one, I'm sorry, is on Main Street. These involve road improvements. And to do that, we often need a right-of-way or an easement to gain access to property, either permanently or during the construction phase, and that's what this authorization allows the town to do, is to seek that. You'll notice nice scary words like gift, purchase, not gift so much, but purchase or eminent domain. There's no expectation that we'll need to use purchase or eminent domain for any of these. However, that's still to be negotiated in some cases, so there may be. Again, the goal is to do this without a cost to the town, but nonetheless, it could happen. I don't foresee us using eminent domain in any way, shape, or form. Generally, people who are getting the road improved right in front of their property are pretty happy to have a new sidewalk put in and the streets widened and paved, so it's generally a cooperative circumstance for us in that regard. And so what you see in Article 22 is the list of properties that are involved. I believe for deed, Belchertown Road reconstruction, resurfacing, and related work on Route 9 Belchertown Road. That list was so long it got placed at the back end of the warrant because the number of property owners was extraordinarily long. And so it runs, I think, 3 pages or so of people, because it's a long stretch of road and everybody that has some piece along the way will need to be engaged in some way. So that's what Article 23 deals with. Article 24 is the abandonment of waterline easement on Kingman Road. Once upon a time, I believe I looked up, I believe it said 1984, we acquired this easement for some waterline work, or potentially some waterline work that never happened, and so therefore we no longer need this easement, and so we will return that back to the landowners in that regard. So again, a fairly straightforward piece of business, but it's an ownership of easement that we don't need any longer, and so we don't want to hold it. I think if any land sales go on, it gets a lot more complicated when the town owns an easement, so we want to not get in the way of anything. Not to say that anybody's sure, I have no idea of whether anybody's trying to sell that land or not. I just, as a general statement of circumstance. So next would be, I believe, Article 27, which is a change to the Agricultural Commission. Oh, right, 27, yeah, 28. I'm sorry, yes, correct. You're doing 27. I'm doing 28. 28 has to do with the Agricultural Commission. I had the right content, not the right number, sorry. And really what this boils down to is when we originally formed the Agricultural Commission, we had set it up with 9 members. But we also placed restrictions on who could be a member, and so what we're finding with that is that it is difficult to get a full complement of members, given the restrictions on who can be on and the number that we had as defined in our action at town meeting several years ago. So this article serves to do 2 things. One is reduce the size of the Agricultural Commission from 9 to 7 members, but it also allows a broadening of the membership, and so it allows for students who are enrolled in agricultural programs to participate. We thought we'd harness a little bit of that mental capital, as it were, in town if we could, and some perhaps energy from those folks if they're interested in farming and pursuing a degree in that to help us out in the Ag Commission. One of the interesting things, if you go and look at the state statute, is that it expressly says that you have to be, I believe, a farmer, and I think it also expressly states that you have to be a resident of the town. However, our forming of our Ag Commission predates that, and so we're grandfathered in with having a little broader rule set. So I think Town Council has opined that we are allowed to, even though we're altering that, we're still within our purview to be broader than the state law because we adopted our Ag Commission before the state law was in effect. And so that's what Article 28 is about. It's about reducing the size a little bit to be able to have a full complement of members and achieve quorum all the time, and then also to broaden who we might attract to serve in that role in our community. Let's see, is that all of them that I had on this warrant?
Well, we could do questions on this and then go
Yes.
on into the,
Okay, but I did cover all the ones, I believe, yes.
yeah.
So I'm happy to take any questions about those that I just blitzed through in about 4 minutes, so.
I was curious if all of the easements listed were ones you expected to be able to do something for, or is it within those, a few?
Oh, as far as, I'm not sure I follow the question. I mean, all of the ones that are clustered in Article
22 is what I-
22, they're all necessary to do the road work, I believe, and sidewalk work that is identified broadly in that article. So all of those will be needed. Again, there's not an expectation of actually needing to purchase those easements, but they'll have to be negotiated with each of the landowners and granted.
So it'll be some, but not all.
As far as, so I think all of the pieces of property that are listed will have some easement that is necessary from each and every one of them. Some of them are literally like this wide and about 8 feet long. I mean, they're really, some of them are quite small. Others are obviously a little larger, but it'll depend on how the project works out and where the property sits and that sort of thing. But many of them are very, very tiny easements. They're just a slight extension of the current right-of-way or a number of different things of that sort. If you don't see an address listed, just to point this out in the warrant, you'll notice some of them, you know, as like on the first one under East Hadley Road multi-use path, there are 2 listed there with a map and parcel number, but there isn't a street address. That's because there isn't a building there that has a street address. And so if it doesn't have a formal street address, it's because there's not one. It's a parcel. If someone were to build a building there, then that would get it a street address. But so if you see those gaps, it's not because someone skipped it. It's because there's not an actual street address in that location. And you'll see that, you know, especially in the appendix, I guess, for lack of a term, at the end with the multiple listings. There are several places that don't all have exact addresses. Most of them do, it seems, now that I look at it. But some of them just say, on the first page of that attachment, almost every one of those just say Belchertown Road. They don't have a number. And the reason for that is because there's not a number associated with that particular parcel. So it's not an oversight of due diligence on the part of our staff. It is literally that there's not an address, street number at those locations.
Any more questions on that part?
Back here.
Oh, there.
Hi, if I'm Rudy Perkins from Precinct 2. If I'm remembering right about the coal parcel, I believe there's a trail behind it that goes up to the Hoyoke Ridgeline, and I'm wondering if and I can't remember the configuration of the easement or the parcel discussions before, does the easement we're talking about now get us to that so that there's potential access up to the ridgeline?
Yes, it does. Right. So in the past, and Mr. Zomek may want to offer, do we have a map? But originally we were going to purchase a bit of land to allow us access to that, and we're instead going to have an easement that allows us access to that. So I think here's the picture. Mr. Zomek, will you want to perhaps orient people a little bit? That's what this is.
This is a slightly different image. I think we had multiple images. So, oops. So originally the town was intending to purchase all of this land through discussions over a year ago. We decided in consultation with the owner that we would not. He, in fact, is going to donate about 6 acres of land here for conservation and trails, and he will develop 8 homes, and this is already under construction. So these will be 8 market rate homes. The easement will bring us in on this private road to here. Mr. Cole is going to build a simple parking area and trailhead right here. So we need an easement to pass and repass, for the public to pass and repass by using vehicles, walking or biking from 116 into the conservation land. That gets us up to the Mount Holyoke Range and the old trolley line that gets you over into South Hadley and Granby.
A question back here.
Chris Riddle, Precinct 2. Can you show on that map where the Epstein Pond is, if it's on there, or where it is in general, and where is the trolley path?
I know I don't know. Do you know? Mr. Zomek, do you know? Oh, is he? He's right over there? Okay. Right along the edge there? Okay. All right.
Any more questions on this one? Okay, then we can go on to the special town meeting articles.
So we, with the passage of the charter, thank you. One of the component pieces of the charter that passed was to have the town seek to have the first election in November of this year. In coming years, it will be in November of odd-numbered years, but to have the first election, the intention was to seek permission from the state to have our first council election on the ballot with our standard statewide elections in November. To do that, we need to get a special act from the legislature, and to do that, we need to have town meeting ask for that. And so we create a special town meeting, and Article 1 is rather lengthy, but the idea is basically, can we have an election on the same day as the state election? And we do a special town meeting because what will happen is the special town meeting will open and hopefully close very quickly, meaning probably the same night. And therefore, once it has closed, I believe there's a 10-day waiting period for it to become official, and then it becomes available to be sent off to our legislature for action if possible. And so that gives our legislature the longest period of time in order to take action on whether or not to allow us to have our election in November. If we do not get this passed, if the state legislature doesn't grant us authority to do it in November, I believe the charter calls for an election in late January. One of the things about having elections is they're not free. Depending on the election, it costs $12,000 to $15,000 to hold an election. So by having this one concurrent with the one in November will save us a little bit of money. Not the full amount of a full election, but it'll save us some. And so that's the intention behind this. And I believe that, and again, the purpose of a special town meeting is so that it will close. The actions of town meeting will be in effect 10 days later, and therefore it can go to the legislature on a quicker time cycle and give them a little more time to get things passed. The deadlines for getting things on ballots is middle of summer, so it really sort of puts those pieces together. The second article was a request from TMCC to potentially the newly formed at Fall Town Meeting Advisory Committee. It was a request to see if we would rescind that. However, we will take action on that at the special town meeting, and if we do not rescind it, then we will have our elections for people to serve on the Town Meeting Advisory Committee, and I think their first opportunity will be the subsequent town meeting, which will probably be in the fall, barring any other special town meetings that might happen between now and then, but we typically have one in the fall. And so the need for that committee may seem not as necessary as it was, and so therefore it's been offered as a suggestion as to whether or not we should do that. So it gave us a place to ask ourselves the question as to whether or not we want to continue with that idea of a town meeting advisory committee. We may well decide that that's a perfectly good idea and a thing we want to continue to do or not, but that is part of why it's on this special town meeting warrant is the timing relative to our annual town meeting warrant was such that we couldn't get it in place in time. And so since we were having a special town meeting anyway, we had an opportunity to place this for consideration at that point in time.
There's a question.
Chris Riddle, Precinct 2, and a member of the TMCC. The TMCC and its subcommittee met just an hour or two ago and decided to voted unanimously to recommend dismissal of Article 2 in the special town meeting.
Any other questions? Okay.
Pat DeAngelis, Precinct 6. What impact does having the November election have on when people have to put in nominating papers or things like that?
So, let's see how good my memory is. I believe if we have the November elections, I believe the nomination papers have to be made available like the 1st of June and are due back to the clerk, I want to say early August. And if not, then everything shifts by about 2 months. There's about a 2 months difference as far as the start time. So the lead time on all the nomination papers for either circumstance is about the same, but if we have a November election, it accelerates that, and I believe that they would make the nomination papers available. I want to say June 1st is what rings a bell, but I would have to look that up. It's in the charter specifically, but I can't remember out of hand, and I'm happy to defer if someone else knows the numbers exactly.
Maurianne Adams, Precinct 10. I guess a follow-up question. Students are voters, of course, and students will not be available during the summer. And I believe some decades ago, there was a student lawsuit on that issue. And I'm wondering if the Select Board has considered that difficulty in making the recommendation on Warrant 1. Well, Article 1, sorry.
So we haven't taken a position on it, for one thing, as yet. We've not had a conversation about that. We did place the question. We were compelled by the charter to put the question to town meeting. Town meeting will make its choice accordingly. But the other factor I would suggest around that is that while the primary would be, is it late August or early September? September, I think, right? And the full election would be in November, which students would be here for the election. If we wait, the election would be in late January, which may fall before students return. So we're sort of stuck on both ends of that in some respects, but again, it's a point worth discussing fully in public for sure. There's no doubt about it. But we haven't had that conversation yet at Select Board as far as our position on that, but it is a concern always in our community, given the students are often in the list of voters and are eligible to participate and sometimes aren't always here. And so we try to time things appropriately.
Okay.
Thank you.
Connie Kruger, where are you? Yes. Doing Article 29, general.
Because you haven't done 27, 28 yet.
I'm going to start on 29.
Wait a second.
Oh.
Did you want to do East Ridge?
When do you want to do?
Oh, yeah, go back and do those.
No.
Wait.
I'm not, no, so this is the one Chris and I are doing. You haven't done that one, and you haven't done this one yet. It's John Horner. Did you do this one? Did Doug do 27? Or was it, are you doing 27? No. Okay. Okay, so you did 27 and 28. I was confused. Okay, we're good.
Yeah,
We're
okay.
good. Yeah, I just want, okay. So, go ahead.
Hi.
Who's gonna start?
I'm Chris Riddle, Precinct 2, and also a member of a Mothers Out Front group that made a proposal to you last time on zero energy bylaw. and it's back. What is it? The Zero Energy Bylaw was a measure that required the town of Amherst to build buildings built by and for itself to zero energy standards. That is to say, the energy demands of the building are met entirely by renewable energy sources. And why are we seeing it again? When we completed it, we did it in somewhat of a hurried fashion in order to get it to town meeting, and it was wonderful, but it wasn't perfect, and the select board asked, and we agreed, and we're actually very eager to meet with the select board, members of the select board, and the chair of the DPW and Fire Advisory Committee, and the manager, and this gang of 8 that we called ourselves, have been redrafting it and perfecting the bylaw, the same bylaw that you saw the last time, with some minor modifications. I'm here to introduce Connie Kruger, who is one of the gang of 8, and to tell you that the essence of the bylaw that you will see again is the same as what it was before. There are minor changes that we will talk about on the floor of town meeting, and maybe Connie will right now. But the bylaw is much better as far as the Mothers Out Front group is concerned and the select board is concerned. It's the product of a very excellent process over these last few weeks, and we're very happy to recommend the article to you very strongly. Here's Connie Kruger, the select board member who helped us with this.
Thanks, Chris. So we've taken lately to doing everything together. And we spent many hours together over the last 2 months, and it's been a very productive process. And I think we all are feeling good, and hopefully town meeting will also support that effort. So I'm going to try to quickly walk you through, as this says, what changed. So what changed is we added a purpose statement, which you can see there, which is we kind of backed into how would we like to improve this, and we thought, hey, there's no purpose statement, and it seemed important to frame the whole article. And it talks about our commitment to a resilient and carbon neutral community, preventing global warming, and eliminating fossil fuels in new town buildings and building additions. So what did change, and this is where it gets a little technical, and I'm going to try to go through it quickly. So the first thing, the dark blue is what is in the current bylaw. You have the new, what we hope, replacement bylaw in your warrant in Article 29. And in the light blue, we tried to solve one of the main kind of conundrums that the municipal side saw in the bylaw as passed. What was passed said, you build a building, it's supposed to be zero energy, 12 months after it's occupied, you find out if it really is, and if it's not, you come back and do some more work on it, and you test it, and you come back. And our point was, that may involve additional appropriations. And in municipal law, and I'm not a municipal lawyer, but my understanding is you can't obligate a future town meeting or council to spend money on something. So we felt like we couldn't. How would we contract for construction when we didn't know if it was going to comply or not comply? So through some detailed discussion, we decided to front load the compliance to certifying that the plans, if they were followed as designed, would result in a zero energy building. And then that design gets reviewed by a third-party independent peer reviewer. So that solved one of the problems, we think. And number two, it's related to number one. If you could switch to the next slide, please. Number two, this made it easier for us to figure out when we could feel comfortable funding and contracting. Number three, we became much more explicit in the bylaw language that we were requiring the buildings that would be built, the town buildings, to be energy efficient. There's some thought, well, what if you built not such an efficient building, but you put in a whole, acre of solar panels to make up for it? And that wasn't really the intent. So we got more explicit about that. I will say with both teams there, we explored everything we could think of about a what if Okay, got 1 minute. I'm going to fly through. Number 4, this was one of the other harder parts. The municipal folks felt that, well, what if it really costs a lot more than just high-efficiency construction? Mr. Riddle at town meeting in the fall, when this got overwhelming support, said by his calculation it wouldn't be more than 10% more than a somewhat conventional building. So we put in a cost cap, and if you could go to number 5, it also elaborates on that. So we take the cost of the energy, zero energy, ready building, and we spend 10% on the renewables that go with actually making it zero, because no building is zero by itself. It's the addition of the renewables. And then if we've spent up to 10%, we have a cost cap. And at that point, we have some options of either going off-site or purchasing the renewable energy. And if the renewable energy we choose to purchase is more expensive than what the utility is charging, we have the option of buying utility-generated energy. I know I have 30 seconds. We clarified definitions. That was another thing that changed. The next slide talks about that. I am not going to go into them. If you could go to the next slide, please. Just, there's one thing on here. Do you have the next one? Oh, okay. I guess I really did truncate it because I knew I wouldn't have a lot of time. So the zero energy ready building plus the renewable energy system equals a zero energy capable building. And in the article, there are definitions, and you really have to kind of go to the definition section because we made up, in a way, some definitions to help explain what we were trying to accomplish in the text of the bylaw. So that's what you're going to be seeing, and there is a one-page report coming out that will be in the second mailing to town meeting. And because I don't have a lot of time, I'm going to wrap up there. But that was really an overview of what we tried to accomplish by working together very intensively to come up with a better, we think a more workable version. Because we all want to see new buildings built that are zero energy and save energy. We don't want to be left with 100-year-old DPWs that are probably leaking, I don't know how much energy. So
Glad to hear that we'll be getting this that we can look at.
Connie, Maureen Adams, Precinct 10. So you must have had something clear in mind at that $2 million.
the number
So
7.
I'm just wondering, what sort of project would be under $2 million?
Mr. Riddle,
I think we
please.
can figure out what would be over
Actually,
$2 million.
Came from the others up front group to up that, so I'm going to let you speak.
Right. We had 1 million before, and basically it's questionable whether the North Amherst Library would come under that threshold or it wouldn't. I thought it would be well under that threshold, but this is just basically a way of the projects that are in the works that we're talking about, the DPW, the fire station, the schools, are all many, tens of millions of dollars. There's no question that those are outside that threshold. But this little project in at North Amherst Library might be hovering around it, and we thought we'd just make it unambiguous and add another $1 million into it. That's what it was about.
Good, thank you. Okay, now,
More questions on that? Okay. Are you all set on energy?
John Harnick. Next, Amherst Affordable Housing Trust and Article 27.
John Hornick, Precinct 7, not a member of the Select Board, but the chair of the Amherst Municipal Affordable Housing Trust. I'm going to go outside a little bit the very straightforward language from Town Council to explain what this is about. For more than 2 years, the Housing Trust has been looking at the East Street School property for the development of affordable housing. Is that Dave? Dave Zomek also provided a plot of that property, which will show up very soon. While there are significant obstacles to this goal, we hope to facilitate construction of 20 to 25 affordable housing units at this site for families. This would represent, first, an excellent reuse of this property, which is no longer needed for education, an important continuation of the town's commitment to develop affordable housing under the Housing Production Plan, and third, a way for the town to begin reversing a long-term demographic trend of many fewer families with school-age children. After meetings with Mr. Bockelman and with the assistance of Mr. Zomek, Mr. Malloy, we agreed that the best path forward would be to place an article on town meeting warrant to allow the Housing Trust to assume control over the property at such time as we could be assured that the housing development goals could be met. So it doesn't go to the trust immediately. If this warrant article passes, it's at some point in the future when we are assured that we can meet these goals. The site is East Street School. It consists of 2 contiguous parcels of property with a total of just over 2 acres. The front includes the old school building. Let's see, which is over there. There's the East Street Common kind of in the middle, and Fort River School is somewhere back here to orient you. And there's this other back piece, which is open space. Let's see. So you've got the site. The town now maintains the building in order to assure that it doesn't fall into complete disrepair. However, it's not in use and hasn't been used for several years. The development process. There are a number of challenges to the development of housing on this site, including the following. The site, particularly the backlot, is wet at certain times of the year, raising questions about whether wetlands regulations would preclude its use. There's also some groundwater on the site, including a culvert that runs underneath, again raising questions about whether regulations would preclude use. There's also some title clearance issues. Town council raised questions about whether the property is under the control of the school board or the town, so that needs to be clarified. And finally, it's not clear whether the old school building could be reused as part of the housing development or whether it would have to be demolished. At this point in time, the trust does not have the answers to these questions. However, it plans to move forward in small, discrete steps to answer them. As the next step, the Housing Trust will contract, actually it has contracted, with an environmental engineering firm to address the wetlands and groundwater issues a little bit later this month. Depending upon these findings, the Housing Trust would then move forward in the following additional steps. 1, contracting with an architectural and site engineering firm to assess the structural integrity and feasibility of reusing that school building, and to prepare schematic designs to show how many units could be built on the lot, or the land, I should say. And finally, developing a request for proposals for potential developers that will include all information gleaned from the due diligence processes described above, as well as the support the town may be willing to provide to the successful developer, including transfer of the property. As part of this process, the Housing Trust will seek input from developers to determine the likelihood that they're interested in the property. Releasing the RFP and negotiating a contract with the successful bidder is the last step, and at that point, the property would be turned over to the trust from the town, and then the trust could then assign it to the developer, assuming that they follow through on all the contract provisions. So thank you for your attention. I guess I'll stand here for a minute more in case there are questions about this.
Okay, thank you. And now, oh, there's, I didn't see you, okay. Jeff Kravitz, Director of the Amherst Economic Development, and talking about the marijuana zoning.
Good evening, Jeff Kravitz. Thank you for inviting me to speak this evening. To do a quick recap, at Fall Town Meeting, I did a presentation and there were 4 articles related to marijuana, local option, excise tax, prohibition on public consumption, creating zoning for retail, recreational retail marijuana shops, and then proposed moratorium as sort of a fallback. So I think when I was here last year, I told you I'd probably be back because we were only dealing with retail sales, and so I'm back to talk about a bunch of other things. I'm going to go a little bit out of order because 2 of the 3 articles are fairly brief, and I can describe them in a few short sentences. So Article 30 simply removes the words not-for-profit and non-profit from the definitions of medical marijuana treatment center and off-site medical marijuana dispensary. The recreational marijuana law allows for the conversion from non-profit to for-profit for these entities, and even though the regulations still require medical marijuana treatment centers to be nonprofit, the state regulations, they're going to be checking the corporate status. That's not really something that we're going to be doing on the local level, so we figured let the states decide how to do it. We didn't want to be a limiting factor here. So that's Article 30. Article 32, which is actually embedded in part of Article 31, but we also wanted to include it as a standalone in case Article 31 does not pass, is basically a clerical correction. It's possible that in our zoning bylaw we put a limitation of 8 recreational marijuana retailers, and that could be interpreted to mean operators. So if you have 8 operators and they each have 2 locations, that's 16 locations. We wanted to limit it to 8 and be absolutely clear that there are no more than 8 retail locations in town. So that's what Article 32 does. Article 31 is the larger zoning article, and I'll very briefly go over what I think are the major changes. There are also some smaller minor changes. We created a new definition, general definition, marijuana establishments, to cover what we hope are all types of marijuana businesses, and use that instead of previously we had medical marijuana treatment center, off-site medical marijuana dispensary, and recreational marijuana retailer, and we figured that would simplify it. So there are a few changes like that, but the major ones are adding new definitions straight from the Cannabis Control Commission state regulations for things like cultivation, craft cultivation, micro businesses, manufacturing, transportation. Note that most are allowed by special permit, but certain ones that we thought were very similar to other types of businesses that don't relate to marijuana, specifically independent testing laboratories, research facilities, and manufacturing. No sales to the general public, it would be all sort of self-contained, are allowed by site plan review in the same zones that similar types of businesses that don't deal with marijuana are allowed by site plan review. We also included 4 definitions that are not allowed in any zones, and those are for social consumption operations and social consumption operators, delivery-only retailers, and social marijuana club. All except for social marijuana club were in the draft Cannabis Control Commission's regulations, and then they decided to take a little bit more time to think about their regulations for social consumption and delivery only, so they were not included in the final ones. And just so that we're not caught off guard, we thought we'd include the definitions and just say you can't allow it until we see what the state does, and then we can, I might be back here again. There's also been some substantive changes to the standards and conditions. basically to make sure that they work well with the state regulations. One of the bigger ones is increase the buffer zone around K through 12 schools. Previously, it had been 300 feet as measured from the building to the marijuana use. When the state regulations came out last month, they had 500 feet from property line to property line. We copied exactly what's in the state regulations in ours. We clarified how to measure the 300-foot buffer, which still exists from residences and places where children commonly congregate, and buildings used as part of the campus of higher education. We included in the draft bylaw that a violation of the host community agreement could result in the revocation of a special permit or site plan review approval. We eliminated the gross floor area for medical marijuana treatment centers that was set at 25,000 square feet. We talked to folks and they said that cultivation of that size, there may be some in the craft cultivation, but larger cultivators, and especially if we wanted farmers and agricultural uses, they'd probably be looking for larger than 25,000 square feet. And we also didn't think it made sense to limit it for medical, but not for recreational. And then there was an odd exception. There is a limitation of 2,500 square feet for the maximum gross floor area for retail sales or medical marijuana sales. And there's an exception for that when they're in a building with, I think it was a pharmacy or something, or palliative care. And it didn't make sense why you could have a bigger facility if it's located in that building, so we just eliminated it. For that, we eliminated that exception, not the gross floor area. So that is the brief overview. I wanted to leave time because I remember last year there were a number of questions. So happy to answer any questions.
Yes, I'm still Marianne Adams, and I'm still from Precinct 10. There's one medical marijuana in the area currently, and that's over in Northampton. There's no medical marijuana here in Amherst. And there's a question about what the relationship in the same building or different buildings or same entrance, different entrances, same staff, different staff, given the complexity of medical marijuana, which I think probably has more different strains involved than recreational might. And so I'm wondering what the thinking is in Amherst of the relationship between medical marijuana facilities and recreational.
So I'll start by saying that the law says that you can't prevent a medical establishment from converting to recreational or co-locating. The state regulations have one section that says that there needs to be some sort of separation, physical separation. It can be a temporary physical separation. It can be stanchions. And I think that there also has to be a more private area for consultation for medical patients. The prevailing thinking is that the Cannabis Control Commission is going to revisit that part of the regulations and look more closely at the division of recreational and medical use. Does that answer the question? I guess it's wait and see. Yeah, I mean, not sure how that's going to happen in Amherst, but do expect there to be several of the medical converting or co-locating.
Are schools including universities?
So the 500-foot from property line to property line is only for K-12 schools. There is a 300-foot buffer from preschools, daycares, and higher ed institutions from those buildings to the marijuana use.
Okay, thank you. Oh, there's one more question. Let's go ahead. That's okay.
Dorothy Pam, District 10. There are no smell barriers? I mean, I remember the smell of marijuana. I remember how dense and strong it would be. I live on Amity Street. Am I going to expect that my whole sidewalk and street, my yard, my backyard, is going to smell like marijuana? And this is a serious question.
I don't know your neighbors, so I don't. I can't answer that. I mean, it's allowed on private land, outdoors on private land to consume it. So
I'm talking about gross consumption. Lots of people, a facility where people are coming lined up, standing, smoking outside.
There's no public consumption. We passed that bylaw. There's no on-site consumption at any of the recreational sales establishments. That's one of the things. We had a definition for social consumption, which is a bar where you consume marijuana instead of alcohol. And it's right now it's prohibited in all zones until the Cannabis Control Commission has regulations for it, and then we'll decide what to do at that time.
A while ago, on University Drive, I thought I saw that it was possible there might be 4 or 5 establishments just on University Drive.
Sure, Ms. Brestrup.
Hi, I'm Chris Brestrup, Planning Director, and there are 2 sentences that you would be interested in looking at. In the marijuana bylaw that currently exists, there's a section that says of marijuana establishments in general that no odor from marijuana or its processing can be detected by a person with an unimpaired or otherwise normal sense of smell at the exterior of the marijuana establishment or at any adjoining use or property. So that's one thing. The second thing is that the Planning Board or Zoning Board of Appeals, most likely the Zoning Board of Appeals, because most of these uses are by special permit from the ZBA, also has a list of criteria that they look at, and one of them is smell.
Okay. Now we're moving on to
Thank you.
Planning Board Zoning, Rob Croner, who's chair of the Zoning Subcommittee.
Okay, I'm Rob Croner, chair of the Zoning Subcommittee of the Planning Board. We have 2 articles this time around, or 2 other articles other than the marijuana articles. The first one, Article 33, is dealing with supplemental dwelling units. These are accessory uses to a primary residence, an additional unit, sometimes called a in-law apartment or something like that. This article is a tweak of an amendment that passed a few years ago that loosened the regulations for supplemental dwelling units in an effort to promote small-scale infill. So we created 3 kinds of supplemental dwelling units. One that is attached and is enclosed within the structure, that would be allowed by site plan review. One that is attached but involves some change to the main structure, that would require a special permit. And then the third, a detached special unit, not attached at all to the main dwelling unit, that would require a special permit. All of these currently are limited to 800 square feet. They allow no more than 3 adults to live in them, and one of the unit, either the main unit or the supplemental unit, has to be owner occupied. Since that was passed, though, the feedback that the planning department has received is that 800 square feet is not quite enough for detached supplemental dwelling unit. You can't put in a two-bedroom unit, for instance. It's harder to put 2 bedrooms or a full kitchen into a detached unit that's only 800 square feet. So this article would bump that up to 1,000 square feet for only that kind of supplemental dwelling unit, only the detached. The other kinds stay at 800 square feet, and all the other regulations also stay the same. Are there any questions on that one? Okay, the other one is Article 35, Inclusionary Zoning. This is our latest and hopefully last attempt to refine the inclusionary zoning bylaw to appropriately apply to the development of multi-unit residential uses throughout town. This time, it's a joint effort by the planning board and some of the people who have been critical of our interpretation of and approach to that bylaw up until now. This is an attempt both to make it more expansive and to give more options for compliance, hopefully to make it more successful overall for everyone. There will be 2 major changes and a set of smaller ones. The first major change is that it will extend the special permit trigger to dimensional modifications that enable a larger building. Building coverage, lot coverage, height, and floors. If you ask for a special permit for any of those, inclusionary zoning would kick in, but not for those that don't lead to a larger building like setbacks or signs. Second, we would provide 2 options for alternative compliance with the mandate for affordable housing. You could pay a payment in lieu of providing the affordable housing, or you could provide off-site units instead of within the development. When 4 or more units of affordable units are required, half of those units have to be on-site, and then you could do the other half, either payment in lieu or off-site if you choose. The payment in lieu amount would be 3 times the median family income for the area, which currently is $67,000, so 3 times that would be about $200,000. And off-site units would have to be within the same zoning district or 500 feet from the main development. And the last part would update some existing language for clarity or to reflect best practices. We would use the term net increases in dwelling units rather than total unit count. The intent is to have inclusionary zoning to apply to new development, not to existing development that might add a few more units. We would delete the calculation that refers to a previous definition of affordable housing. It's no longer in there. We don't need that language. We would clarify that both rental and ownership units are to be permanently affordable to the extent possible. And we would add size and bedroom count to the list of qualities that affordable units must match the market rate units that they are paired with. So we think this makes the bylaw more applicable, especially downtown. It's not really applicable at all downtown now. And it also makes it more flexible. And hopefully together that makes it more successful in terms of producing affordable units and allowing and not depressing development that we'd like in the downtown. Questions?
Any quick questions?
John Hornick. Where does the payment in lieu go, Rob?
Oh, good question. The payment in lieu would go to the Amherst Municipal Affordable Housing Trust.
Terrific idea.
To be used for affordable housing, obviously.
Maureen Adams, to the extent possible, when you talk about instead of affordable in perpetuity, when you say to the extent possible, what does that mean and who determines that?
So, affordable housing can be created in many ways. It could be owned by the town or by a nonprofit that owns it forever. Or it could be owned by a developer who gets money from the state or something to create the housing, and that money is only in place for 30 years or 40 years or something. If we are not able to to extend the affordability beyond that, then it might run out. But the ideal is that it would be permanent.
Okay, thank you. And now, let's see. Jerry Weiss. Oh, there you are. A zoning petition law, Article 36.
Good evening. So a little background. I got this ball rolling, and my hat's off to the planning board for picking up on it and improving my article. I brought this forward because the interpretation being used by the planning board completely eliminated downtown from ever being able to use inclusionary zoning. And that doesn't seem right, which is why the 4 buildings that have been built and or permitted don't have any affordable units right now. So I wanted to stop that practice, and hopefully new buildings then going forward will have affordable units in them. And the additions that the planning board made to my article were the payment in lieu and off-site provisions. Otherwise, I believe they're identical. So they took my template and added those 2 pieces of flexibility, which I think make it an even better article. I do want to say one thing is that this is an attempt to improve it. Developers could still decide, well, then we're not going to ask for any special permits downtown, and we'll end up back at 0 where we are now. The only way to really make inclusionary zoning work is by making it mandatory, which in my research around Massachusetts and the country is it's mandatory. In Cambridge, if 10 or more units are being built or 10,000 square feet of units are being built, inclusionary zoning is mandatory. In Brookline, if 6 or more units are built, it's mandatory. I'm going to research other towns, but I have yet to come across anywhere that has the ability of a developer to opt out by not asking for a special permit. So I'm saying this because there will be calls and complaints in town meetings saying this is unfair to developers and they can't afford to do this. This is an incredibly generous proposal, and the original one was incredibly generous as well. If it were mandatory, we wouldn't even be having this discussion. It would just be happening. So that's just a point. There'll be another point raised, I believe, which is that this amounts to a taking. Like I said, there are towns and cities in Massachusetts in which it's mandatory and it's not been declared a taking. So to worry about Amherst having this be called a taking when the developers have an out, they have an out. All they have to say is, okay, we won't have any special permits. We're going to build it without them. It boggles my mind that topic has even come up. I'm just preparing myself and you for possible complaints. I want to be ready, and I want you to be ready. Had the proposed planning board article been in effect in 2009 when the first building went up and through today, and developers had chosen to use the payment in lieu to its fullest extent, which is half of the units, we would now have $2.6 million in the housing trust. So it's pretty effective if developers ask for special permits. If they don't, no affordable units. But I still think it's a good idea to offer those provisions. Well, that's the short story I'd be glad to answer questions. Mr. Riddle?
So, is that gone? Is it on? Chris Riddle, Precinct 2. May I interpret that if Article 35 passes, you will withdraw Article 36?
You may interpret that correctly. That will happen. Yeah, so I am urging people to vote for Article 35. Is that correct? And if so, if that passes, I'll move to dismiss Article 36.
One more question.
Rob Crowner, Planning Board. I forgot to mention that the public hearings for the inclusionary zoning articles and for the supplemental dwelling units are tomorrow night in this room. So you can come and ask more questions.
Correct. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Please vote yes.
And now, a bylaw petition, Sandra Gooselhart. Where? Oh, I'm sorry. I skipped, I skipped Van Kaner. A petition, Article 34.
There it is, thank you. Okay. Hi, my name's Van Kaner from Precinct 2, and I have brought forward Article 34, which I think is its official number now, which deals with the density of development in our rural areas. And especially now, I'm focusing on areas with elevations high enough that town water cannot be provided with our current water tower. And I will show maps shortly to show what areas of town these are. I have accepted the planning department's suggestion to alter my article's wording so that the official zoning map would not be changed if my article passes. This avoids the unintended consequence of many non-conforming properties if the zoning map were changed. Because if it were changed, then everybody who was zoned RO and now is RLD would be non-conforming, and that would be 195 properties. So to instead, my current motion is on the board there, which I'll read. To see if the town will vote to amend Article 6, dimensional regulations of the zoning bylaw for properties in the RO outlying residence zoning district that are above 425 feet in elevation above mean sea level and are not connected to town sewer and water, that these properties shall comply with the dimensional requirements of the RLD residential low density zoning district. There are three main concerns. There are three main concerns that this I don't know a slide about this. I just will say three main concerns that this petition article addresses. One, the protection of sensitive wells and septic systems in these areas. Simply by having a greater density of wells and septic systems increases the risk of failure. Even currently, there are significant septic and well issues in the areas that I will show you maps of. Two, eliminating or at least delaying the significant expense of extending town water and sewer to these higher elevation areas. Building a new water tower or a system of pumping stations would be very expensive. And three, the intention of my article would be to bring our zoning bylaws more into harmony with the goals of our master plan. And Amherst master plan consistently suggests preserving our significant rural landscapes and farmland, steering development more towards our village centers. So all three of those are important to me. And now I'll show you the maps about the areas of town I'm talking about. This is not one of them. So it's a different a different file. There we go. So there, if you could go to the one that shows just the brown, which may be before or after that. Before that, sorry, the other side of that. Oh, there it is. So this is a map of everywhere in Amherst that's above 425 feet elevation, the brown area. So the bottom of the map is south, the Holyoke Range area, which is not relevant because it's already zoned RLD or preserved. So the area I'm speaking of is just the northeast corner of Amherst. So you can see the brown there. The next map shows the zoning of these areas, the zoning of the town overlaid. Oops, nope, other direction. There. So that one, well, the one right before that shows the whole town zoning. And I wanted to just point out, I don't have my pointer here, but, excellent. Is this, there we go. So just an example of the zoning that's allowed. The density that's allowed in RO zoning is down here off of West Pomeroy Lane. That development shows 3/4 acre lots, which is RO zoning. That would be allowed where I'm speaking of. This article is dealing with this area, which I'll get a close-up now, the next map. So the area in the northeast corner of Amherst includes Market Hill Road, Flat Hills Road, a little bit of East Leverett Road up high on the left side of East Leverett Road as you head out of town. And so you can see the general area. It's basically that area that's near Leverett and Shutesbury. And it currently is allowed to have 3/4 acre building lots throughout this area. And to me, that seems inappropriate based on our master plan and on our water and septic issues. And the water in particular is an issue because town water cannot be supplied to any of these areas that are brown currently with our current water tower, which the base of is at 404.2 feet. So 425 is the highest house that can get town water currently. Any questions? I'll try to answer.
Andrew Rose, Precinct 4. Curious why this is coming from a citizen's petition rather than through the planning board?
Sure. I've spoken to Christine Brestrup about this. The planning board and the planning department has had their hands full, I'd say, probably with the development issues in the downtown areas. And there's been, they would encourage me to do a more public process that's more lengthy to bring this more of a community decision in Cushman area. We, as a Cushman area, have been very organized in the past, fighting the retreat, which was another development in this area. So the current issue seems very important to my neighbors because of a recent proposal for a development of Whirlwind Farm, which is the Reuter property right at the corner of Market Hill and Flat Hills Road, which is a 7.74 acre lot that is now has a proposed development of 7 building lots on this land, which has been farmed for 150 years. So we as neighbors, we're very concerned not just about the farmland preservation, but also the viewscapes, and other land right adjacent to it that's very valuable to us as for aesthetic reasons, as well as for reasons about worry about septic systems and wells. There are several wells that have very low production in our area. One of them is 0.5 gallons per minute, which really isn't enough. Where I grew up has now water at 30 feet storage instead of 80 feet storage, which it was in 1994. So in those years, for whatever reason, the water table seems to be not great everywhere. There have been some problems with wells near the reservoir as well. So there's concern about water in particular, and concern this development just sort of threw it in our faces that this kind of density is allowed in our area, and we disagree with that.
Okay, thank you. And our next meeting is Article 37, a petition by Sandra Gesselhart.
This is about the existing. Thanks. This is about the existing noise bylaw. It's Article 2, General Regulation, Prohibitions, Number 3, Unlawful Noise, Section 1, Unlawful Noise Prohibited. Paragraph E would read as follows, adding gunfire noise. The sound of gunfire beginning at 9 a.m. and ending at 6 p.m. from the months April to November. When reviewing the elements of what is now considered a violation of the existing bylaw, gunfire fits some of the following description: excessive, unnecessary, or unusually loud noise which disturbs, injures, or endangers the reasonable quiet, comfort, or health and safety of others. The Norwottuck Fish and Game Association is located partway up the notch on the southern border of town. I mention the location because the location is part of the problem. The gunfire echoes down the hill and is heard by hundreds of people living in the valley below. The current hours of the Fish and Game Club are from 9 a.m. until dusk. This proposal to amend the noise bylaw would at least provide some gunfire-free hours to enjoy the outdoors in the warmer months. The hope is that we can all coexist and be better neighbors. I presented this as select board, and they are feeling so strongly that issues like this need to be tabled until the new configuration of government is in place. So I'm not sure what to do about this. If I should motion to dismiss it, or? No? That's it?
They have to speak about that.
Okay. Any questions?
Hi, so Connie Kruger, I wasn't quite prepared, but we got to this issue 2 weeks ago at the select board meeting, prior Monday. Just if you look at the transition section of the charter, it has a number of things that happen once the vote, the warrant was signed and finalized before we knew the outcome of the election, because it had to be because of the timeline. So now that we know that the new form of government, the town council, is passed, there's certain transition rules, and we've been working with our town attorney, which we're no longer calling town council because it's too confusing, but town attorney, Joel Bard from Cobbleman and Page, and we're asking for additional clarity because there's a number of things that aren't as clear as we would like, because we're entering new territory. So you can't take a petition article off the warrant. We have to act on it. So the people who did that, it's on. But council is helping us decide which things this annual town meeting can actually act on. The idea is that you can't take actions that then encumber a future council, and that's not absolutely clear what that means. So I'm not council, and so I don't want to go down that road, but we're all struggling with figuring that out. So there's a number of things on the warrant that we think we can act on because they're a necessary part of doing business. Like, we're absolutely clear we can pass the budget. That's okay, even though we're spending money that goes through that whole next fiscal year. So that's essential and necessary to running the government. There's other things that aren't, and there's other things in this gray area. So we're all working with our town attorney to get more clarity. We haven't really, landed on an absolute, but I think you were told that that action may be beyond the scope of what town meeting can do. But I don't want to say absolutely, because this is a new area, and I'm not the person who's going to decide, and we don't absolutely know yet. But that's the thinking. A lot of people have been giving opinions recently about whether an article could be acted on or not acted on, and I appreciate all that, but we're still trying to sort it out. So I just, that's part of the unclarity. Is it the town manager? Is it town meeting? Is it the moderator? Or is it the select board? Or some combination? And I know Mr. Weiss, as a charter commission member, I'm sure you're probably more familiar with the transition section than I am. But if I've said anything wrong, tell me if I've said anything, please tell me if I've said anything incorrect.
Okay, now, oh, I'm sorry.
I'm going to comment.
Go ahead.
As a commission member, I was a member, I think I'm still a member of the commission. I don't know if we've been dissolved yet. That is a really poorly written section. And shame on all of us for allowing that to go through, and boo on the consultants who didn't catch it. It's so vague, as Connie said. What does it mean? Who gets to decide what it means? And so I don't have any further insight into this other than I wish I had caught it myself. And I'm kind of curious if the town attorney says, well, that's outside of the scope of the transition article, whether town meeting can overrule that and decide to vote on it or not. It would be interesting to know if town meeting is actually going to have the last say in what they want to vote on and what they don't. And then if somebody thinks that that was in error of the law, let them sue the town or sue town meeting or whatever. It's a mess, and I am 1/9 responsible, and I apologize to the town.
It's just that I have one further question, Maurianne Adams, and that is, my understanding is that the Charter Commission, the council, once it's established, can make the decisions that the council makes, which means the council could override any decision of years or decades of town meeting. So I find it difficult, I guess it's, let me not make a comment, but a question. How is this different? That is what we might be able to act on in this town meeting, which the council could overrule, from anything else that we might have acted on in town meeting, which the council could also overrule. Does anyone know?
Okay, I think that this is beyond our articles, and we're getting late. Linda Fay, petitioner, resolution to prevent nuclear war. This is Article 38.
Hi. I certainly hope so, because the danger of nuclear war is real, and I think we'll all agree it's growing. We need to act now. Back from the Brink, the Call to Prevent Nuclear War is a national grassroots campaign seeking to fundamentally change U.S. nuclear weapons policy and lead us away from the dangerous path that we're on. The call lays out 5 common sense steps that we should take to reform our nuclear policy. We're asking individuals and organizations around the country to endorse the call and build a national movement to get the government to adopt it as one of its highest national priorities. The 5 simple steps are, number 1, renouncing the option of using nuclear weapons first. 2, listen to this, ending the sole unchecked authority of any U.S. president to launch a nuclear attack, taking U.S. nuclear weapons off hair trigger alert, canceling the plan to replace our entire nuclear arsenal with enhanced weapons, and finally, actively pursuing a verifiable agreement among nuclear-armed states to eliminate their nuclear arsenals. That's what this petition is, and when we pass it, when we support it, a copy will go to Congressman McGovern, Elizabeth Warren, Senator Markey, and the current president. And we now have over 100 national organizations which have signed on all across the country, faith groups, Union of Concerned Scientists, scientist groups. I'm happy to answer any questions. And if there are no questions, I hope that we in Amherst will support this petition.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, our last petition is a resolution in support of the Paris Climate Agreement. And this is a petition of Cameron Gray-Lee and his teacher, Irene LaRoche, will speak to it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Good evening. Cameron's back there. Wave, Cameron. Okay. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to you tonight. So my name is Irene LaRoche. I teach social studies at Amherst Regional Middle School. And I'm here actually to speak on behalf of the 7th grade students on Team Jaguar, of which Cameron belongs. This is a group of students who's been working with me this past year. In our social studies classes at Amherst Regional Middle School, we encourage students to be critically engaged and make connections between what they're learning in their classrooms and the world outside the classroom walls. A primary goal of our social studies department is to provide students with the knowledge and skills that they need to be informed and active citizens in a democratic society. We ask students, what kind of world do you want to live in? And as they learn about their country and their world, they often feel compelled to act, and we follow their lead. So you may be familiar with a group of 8th grade students from Amherst Regional Middle School who, during their inquiry into the legacy of Columbus in the school year 2015-2016, decided that they wanted to engage the public in an examination of Columbus Day. As part of that work, they successfully petitioned town meeting to designate the second Monday of October as Indigenous Peoples' Day. Earlier this year, our 7th grade global studies classes were learning about oil-producing countries in Western Asia. And as part of our environment unit, they were also studying climate change. After learning about the effects of greenhouse gases, students asked to take action. Many students were interested in engaging the town in conversations about climate change. Multiple students investigated submitting a petition to Amherst Town Meeting. Cameron Gray-Lee submitted the petition on behalf of the team, and following the conclusion of the unit, students elected to keep working towards their goal of taking action. 28 students have formed a committee, Team Jaguar Takes on Climate Change. That's the name they came up with. And they want to bring a petition to town meeting. The rest of the students on the team, and there's a total of about 74 students, are continuing their own projects that include planning public awareness campaigns. They have great ideas about the PVTA buses and ads on the buses, and also having workshops for alternative energy sources. 2 students are working on, they want to have a workshop for middle school students to teach them how to use solar energy to charge their cell phones. So there's all kinds of great projects that are connected to this work. We had a couple of students from our school, I have about 30 seconds left, who are working on looking at solar panels in the public school building. Okay, so we understand that Amherst has a commitment to climate change. It's a green community. Is that my 30 seconds? Okay, so am I allowed to finish? Okay, thanks. Sorry. All right. So as the students learned about Massachusetts' pledge to sign the Paris Climate Agreement, along with numerous other states and cities in the country, in the wake of Trump administration's decision to withdraw the United States from the agreement, they asked if Amherst had signed on. The students would like to know that the town of Amherst has committed officially to the Paris Climate Agreement. They're looking to strengthen alliances between our community and others who are committed to reversing the effects of climate change. And they seek to keep the topic of climate change at the forefront of the minds of our community members. And that's what this petition is about. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, everybody who has taken part tonight.